So I'm going to read you from her diary at the beginning. And it begins like all diaries on the 1st of January. We know they are coming. We've watched the smoke rise for 2 weeks now, knowing they will soon be at our gates, the gates you promised to finish whitewashing when you returned. All day, every day, tidy pillars billow straight up into the summer sky. No breeze dares bother them. Day by day, farm by farm, the English draw closer. Even on Christmas morning, we woke to smoke spooling across the sky like wool waiting to be wound. It cleared as you said prayers and we sat down to lunch. I still worry that port was dry. The Creel family are only 6 miles east, and when their big red barn goes up, the barn it took 20 men a winter to build, it'll be us next. The chair I'm sitting on, every berry ripening on the tree outside the window, every fruit, every tree, they will all go. I still struggle to believe the news that reaches even our half-painted gates. Soon, everything we've built in our 10 years here will be gone. I've taken to rising even earlier so I can wander our 5 rooms alone. Remember when we had just one? I blink hard and press my eyelids together to engrave it all where I can always see it. I hope you remember it too, Samuel. I've often embarked on a diary with the new year and found my thoughts ran out long before the pages, but I'm resolved to keep at this one. I'm setting these words down for us and for Fred. He's outside bothering Letty, who's calling, so I must go in a minute. I'm writing at our kitchen table where we sat and prayed and talked and laughed and worried all these married years. Every evening after dinner, you tapped your pipe out and it left little scorches. Now I run my fingers over the marks, regretting every tut. I'll read this to you when you return victorious. Our cause is just. God will preserve you, Samuel. Remember, Psalm 110, the Lord at thy right hand shall strike through kings in the day of his wrath. That day is coming. Now, I must go and see what Letty wants. So that's the beginning, the very beginning of Sarah's diary. The English come, they burn the farm, as they burn over 30,000 farms. And Sarah is literally carted off with her wee boy to a place called Bloemfontein, where she's put in a tent in camps with thousands eventually of other people. And this camp is the first to be called a concentration camp. It's a concentration of people into an area. And what happens to Sarah there is terrifying and dark, but also, you know, she makes this wonderful friend called Helen. And together they try to get through this nightmare and to save Fred. So that's Sarah's diary. I'm going to read you a wee bit now from the next character that we meet, who's in 1976. It's an amazing woman called Raina, who's very much based on my granny. If anybody's read Maggie and Me, they might recognise her. So Raina is a teacher and she is in the classroom, and this is just a very short bit. Raina's Monday was a day to cut out and keep. Due to a quaint outbreak of measles, half her class was off, so she got quality time, that's what it's called now, with her favourites. You're not supposed to have favourites. Why can't all children stay 5 forever, she wondered, as she read aloud the simplified scripture of Daniel in the lion's den. Afterwards, they made collages of lions and she let them squander paper on extravagant manes. She told them how her parents had taken her to Kruger when she was little and she'd seen real lions, and how in her grandparents' time, lions were everywhere, but now they were penned in big reserves, safe from poachers. Raina loved the school smells, powdery palettes of paint, tiny perfect suns of colour, the secret papery darkness of the stationery cupboard where hyacinths were forged, even the boys' toilet tang of the glue pots, the smell familiar, if not pleasant. Chalk dust floated forever in shafts of sunlight. She enjoyed cutting out sugar paper, turning it in her hand to make complex shapes. If a child was very good, she snipped out a special zigzag-edged star, then wrote their name on it and tacked it high on the wall. After her probationary months, she was presented with her own pinking scissors with a neat typed label on the handle. Mrs. Brand, teaching assistant. Today, she cut out whole skies of stars. So that's Raina as a teacher. And then just from towards the middle bit of the end of the book is a boy called Willem, or Willem if you're using the proper accent. And this is the bit I've not read before, so I thought I would read it today. Willem is In a camp, he has been sent to this contemporary camp by his mother and her partner. He doesn't fit in to the very macho butch society around him. And he's been sent to this camp run by soldiers who promise to make men out of boys. Camp's brutal. These places are real. And so this is inspired by a real place and a real boy. That first night, Willem feels famous. Everybody calls him Brant, claps him on the back. Hey, hey, how's it, Brant? He's never really noticed how strong his second name is. He can be Brant now, he thinks, sitting up straight around the fire with all the other boys who left their first names outside the fence. This place is smaller than he'd imagined. Ahead sag 2 rows of tents like the ones in that museum in Bloom, cream canvas worn and patched with years of scraps. Dragonflies jet across a man-made pond, and next to this rises a giant cotton bud flagpole. Willem recognises the red, white and black flag from Jan's library. Past this is a low concrete sty of big dirty pigs. Some busy white chickens bustle around, but there are no other animals, not even an ostrich. So much for conservation. In the centre stands a guard tower covered in the same camouflage netting that's draped over the fence surrounding the whole compound. Who are they watching for? Looking through the flames at the other cadets, it's clear nobody in here was getting picked for any teams out there, except maybe Worricker. Corporal stripes adorn his shoulders, making him their commanding officer. One boy is so tall and thin he looks like a folded razor. Spreading next to him is his opposite. Several have taped earlobes covering piercings, and even Worricker has a tattoo peeking from his sleeve, black tendrils creeping down his arm. Willem can't identify the leaves in the dark. We should all still be at school, he realises. We're all problems here to get fixed. He doubts any of them had a buzz cut before. He wonders when his curls will come off. He's never liked them, threatened them with scissors 100 times, but his ma always pleaded. Maybe he'll move faster without them. Willem is suddenly average, maybe even slightly above average, and it feels glorious. So there you go.
Thank you for reading those, Damian.
Pleasure.
It makes sense for me to begin by asking something that surprised me when I read the acknowledgements at the end of the book, which was namely that you'd not been to South Africa prior to starting to work on this book. So why did South Africa and tapping into this extraordinary recent history of that country, why did that appeal so much?
Well, I mean, I came to Cuckfield a few years ago and I talked about my memoir, Maggie and Me, and at the time I wasn't looking for a novel to write. I moved to write by what concerns me, what moves me, and the story for this novel came out of a story that I'd read in the newspaper, a piece that I read in the Telegraph with a big photograph of a boy, and that boy looked just like a boy who'd come to my school when I was about 11. He'd come to my school from South Africa, come to my school in Scotland for a year. We became friends. I had a crush on him. We went back to South Africa. I'd never seen him or heard from him again. It was before Facebook. And until I saw this picture in the paper and I thought, oh, it's him. And it wasn't him because he'd be a man now, but it looked just like him. And I read the story and it told me that this boy in this photograph had been sent by his mum and her stepfather to a camp. And he was 15 when he'd been sent there. His name was Raymond Boys. And he'd been starved and tortured and beaten and killed there. He was unrecognisable to his own mother when she eventually saw him in hospital. And if you see the pictures of Raymond, you won't recognise him as a boy who went in there at all. And I was transfixed by the story of this boy who had been this beautiful boy and how broken he was and what had happened to him. And I thought, who was he? What kind of mother sends her son to a place like this? What was she hoping for? Who are the people who run these places? What's going on? So I started in that kind of journalist way, which you know so well, of following the trial. And I was following the trial online from the UK. And, the trial of the man who ran the camp, where several boys that transpired had died, and there's a whole network of these camps. And but I started to lose track of the story because there's so much like that happening in South Africa. There's a great deal of violence. And But I couldn't stop thinking about this boy and his family, and I thought maybe I would do a piece of journalism, or, you know, get somebody else to do a piece of journalism, because I just didn't want this story to be forgotten. And in the end, you know, contacted the NGO who was involved with the trial, and they put me in touch with his mother, and I started corresponding with his mother. Again, there was no end in sight for this. It wasn't like I wanted to do it. It was just the kind of humanity of it, really. And that's what led me to the history. Because I thought, well, why do these camps exist in this country now? And that led me back to the camps that existed before, which paved the way for the national, you know, the party and apartheid and everything else that happened. So I started in the present and worked my way back to the past.
Right, that's interesting. So you almost began with the end of the book.
Yes.
And then had to sort of work your way back.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's exactly how it happened.
And this was 5 years of work. I mean, particularly research into the detailed history, particularly of that Boer War period, because presumably, I mean, because most of us are not taught much about that, if anything. So you were coming to that presumably pretty much afresh, were you?
I mean, I was, because as you say, it's not really taught. It's not taught now, and certainly wasn't taught when I was at school. I learned more about the Tudors than I did about the Empire. And, you know, what Britain did there was not our proudest moment. You know, this was two small states which would become South Africa. You know, the argument was, you know, ostensibly over the voting rights of gold and diamond miners. Really, it was about the gold and about the diamonds. And, you know, 250,000 soldiers descended on that part of the world from all across our empire. So when I've been touring with the book, it's been really interesting in Canada, in Australia and New Zealand. These were the first foreign wars for those countries, and they have extravagant Boer War memorials in those countries, very extravagant. And because it helped force their sense of national identity to fight for the mother country. But, you know, it was thought this war would be over by Christmas. We struck medals with the end date of the war in sight, which we had to melt down. It went on for 3 years. And part of the reason that we won that war was because we invented these concentration camps. And there were over 30 of these camps, and more women and children died in these camps than soldiers died in the entire war. So just think about what that psychologically, what that does to a very small country, a very religious people. It's created a scar that is still there now. And those women died, those children died, and men died, of course, too, of starvation, of dirt, of squalor. And it was conscious and entirely preventable. And it was done so that it would break the morale of the men and end the war sooner. What often happened was so that men would come to the camps to surrender, and the women would send them back. The women would send them back and say, you go back and fight for our country. And, you know, it was incredible bravery and horror that happened there and then at that time. But again, we weren't taught.
I mean, that you talk about those who surrendered, whether it was the women or the men. I mean, that crops up, doesn't it, quite early on in Sarah's diary, because clearly the option to turn around and say, okay, I'm going to go along with this to an extent, was put in front of her, and she consistently said, no, I'm not going.
No, absolutely. And and that's based on reading the diaries and letters of women from that time, which again I only know about thanks to a brilliant, brave Englishwoman called Emily Hobhouse. I'd love to talk about her in a minute, but you know, that oath of neutrality, if you signed the oath to Queen Victoria, you know, it wasn't a political statement. What it potentially could do is save your life, because when you get put in the camps, you get rations if you're white. If you're black, you go in a black camp, you have to pay for your rations, and you get even less for it, and that's even worse. But in these white camps, if you sign the oath, you get more food, you get more water, you will get soap, right? Life-saving soap. Whereas if you don't sign, you become what's called an undesirable, and that was an official category of person, and you get less food. You don't get, I think you get very little fresh meat, and you don't get candles, you don't get soap. You get a 1/16 of a can of condensed milk, as you know from reading the ration list. That's entirely accurate in the book. And so, you know, and it's very cruel because, of course, in the camps there are shops, which surprised me when I learned about it. You know, you could buy vegetables and fruit and meat, but you're not allowed to buy those things, even if you've got money, if you're an undesirable. So it's this very kind of punitive system that the British put in place to make people give up, really. And I was shocked. I mean, the Boer women believe that if there's a candle, however faint a candle, a child can't die in the presence of light. And the British would insist on lights out every single night, knowing this, which I just found callous. And of course, there were good British people and good individuals, and I show them in the book. But as a system, it was consciously underfunded and designed to inflict civilian damage.
And if you went into one of those shops, because you were allowed to, but
Yeah.
you gave what you bought to a quote undesirable,
Yeah.
you would suffer for that as well.
Oh, absolutely. You know, people did. There were all sorts of trading. I mean, it's, you know, you could buy a gramophone or a bolt of silk, but you couldn't buy a pint of milk or the equivalent, or vegetables for your child. You know, and these, you know, again, these camps were known about in the UK. You can read about them in Hansard. They were debated at the time, and around the world, Britain's name was dirt for what we were doing. There were cartoons in European newspapers of Britannia standing over mass graves of children, or of British bulldogs attacking women and children. And, you know, at the time, there were lots of people in Britain who opposed it and lots who were for it. And I think for me, that's really interesting because, you know, the history of then is actually easier to research than the history that's closer to us in time. Because, you know, there's papers and there's diaries and there's books, even if some of it's suppressed. Emily Hobhouse went there, and she, you know, she heard the rumours of what was happening. She couldn't believe it. She said that the children and women were wilting like hothouse flowers, and she sent back to the UK. And because she was powerful and aristocratic, she was able to effect change and save some lives. But Emily Hobhouse wasn't believed at first, and the Daily Mail ran a headline about her, which was "Woman, the Enemy." She was pilloried. She went on to build hospitals in Belgium for German soldiers during the First World War. She was a very brave woman. And when she died, her ashes were sent to Bloemfontein, to the site of the first concentration camp. And her ashes are interred underneath the big obelisk that's there. And she was an incredibly brave woman. And she recorded the accounts of these women and children, because many of them couldn't read and write. And so she, you know, she went there and listened to them and wrote down what they had to say.
Also in Bloemfontein, of course, is the Anglo-Boer War Museum, which I know you went to, obviously, as part of the research, and also you were there as readers of your novel, because the school trip takes there, and that's when some of these slight overlaps begin to appear.
Yeah.
What's that museum like, and how much is it trying to convey some of the things that you just talked about?
It's a very sad museum, because, you know, the story of these people has been swept aside in many ways, or mythologized in other ways, by white nationalists who use it as the foundational myth of their own victimhood in order to justify apartheid. But that doesn't negate the real human suffering that occurred there. So, you know, you go in and there is this massive marble wall with all the names of people who died in the war on it. And I went there and I looked down all these names. I was there for a really long time. And I'd already decided on the names of my characters, on Sarah and Fred, and I found their names on the wall. And they were a mother and son, and they had the same names, but the Fred on the wall was older than my Fred, but they were the same names. And it felt to me like these people are speaking to me. Like I have to do this for these people. And you go in past the monument as it's described, and the museum is not very well cared for in parts, and it's kind of, the lights aren't even working, and in other parts it is well cared for, and they're trying to tell the story of what happened, and the story's been added to over the years. So they never, for example, used to acknowledge what Black people did or what happened to Black people during this conflict, and they've added on, you know, an exhibition about the Ack Terriers, who were the black people who were co-opted to work for Boer soldiers, but who weren't given guns. So it's grown and changed over the years, and it's an interesting place. I can't think of a place that would be like it here in the UK that's similar, but it's very down at heel.
it's interesting in terms of how you talk about the sort of the formation of the novel, because there you are in this museum and you'd already decided what the names of your characters would be for that first part of the novel, and they're rather handily replicated by coincidence. How are you at this point deciding what's happening in the first part and the next part and the next part? Is that all? I
wasn't. I was just gathering. I was madly gathering and absorbing information, and there are so many things that I had to cut from this book. It was probably originally 30% longer because I wanted to put in a whole bit about Winston Churchill, who was there as a war reporter. In the end, I cut that whole section. There was this mad prophet who was on the side of the Boers who claimed that he could read the stars, and people believed him, and they went into battle believing him, and they died because of him. There were all these stories that just never made it to the final book because that's the job of editing, and it took a whole year to edit this book. With the help of editors in South Africa, so that I could be sure of getting stuff right. But at that point, when I was on that trip, I was just gathering information. Like, for example, the Southern Cross. It dawned on me that if you live beneath the Southern Cross, if you can see the Southern Cross in the sky every night, that's a part of your life. So the Southern Cross becomes a recurring motif through the book. Things like the anthills, which you can see as you're driving along, because you've spent time there. You see these red domed anthills, and they just look perfect and almost man-made. And stop the car, get out, go over to them, touch them, knock on them, find out that they're hard, and think, what are they? What's that? And then you discover, of course, in the camps, women would hollow the anthills out and use them as ovens. So just being on the ground physically, I think, changes a book. That in a way that I at least couldn't avoid. I've got very detailed diaries of those of that particular trip, which was funded, I have to say, by the Arts Council. So I'm very grateful to them for me.
But in terms of how the later elements of the book begin to refer back to the earlier ones, and that you learn more about the Van der Watt connection later, the fact that she obviously wasn't supposed to write a diary in her. He did, and Willem wasn't supposed to keep his phone in the camp he was in, but he did. Is all of that in your head at the start, or do you suddenly have a moment where you think, oh, hang on, I can make that kind of tie together? Well,
I mean, the diary came about because I love diaries and I love first-person stories, and that I felt would make it immediate, because the thing about history is that we're living through history right now. We're not doing our event because of history in person. So, but we're not often conscious of living through history. And I want Sarah's diary just to be, this is what's happening, and retrospectively it becomes history with a capital H. And it's interesting, people have gone to the museum and asked to see Sarah's diary, which of course doesn't exist anywhere at all other than here. But the stuff about the plot is, some of it's done at the time and some of it was edited in retrospect. I think it's interesting that I have not tied together all the moments in the book, all the threads, because life is not like that. Life is not that tidy. Nobody's life is that tidy. And I can't bear it when there isn't space in a book for the reader to make up their own mind or to do a bit of work. I think writers need to trust readers that they can do a bit of work. So you can work out, when Willem goes to the museum, what happened to Fred all those years ago. You can do that, it's a bit of a nightmare for me doing the maths and working out the dates and looking at a calendar and making sure it all adds up. But that's my job. The reader can do that. And so that was a real pleasure, leaving space in the book for readers to make up their own mind and come to their own conclusions.
And one thing you're clearly pointing us towards concluding is the connection in historical terms, in terms of the way South Africa has developed in the last 100 years, between what happened during the Boer War and the feelings of guilt and whatever else in that conflict, and what subsequently happened with the arrival of apartheid.
I think that's true. I mean, I felt that was very clear when I was there. If we think that, Sarah and Letty, they all lived on the farm together, they weren't equal. by any stretch of the imagination. This was not some paradise. But when the British arrived, they separated black people and white people in a way they hadn't been separated before. They created these black camps, you know, and we don't know how many people died in those places. We know conditions were terrible. There are very few records because, the victors write history, and black people were promised equality in votes afterwards and didn't get it. And that separateness was a big part of what the National Party continued. Now, just to explain the politics a wee bit more, you know, black people needed to pay for their own rations, and there was nowhere for them to work. So the British employed them, because they burnt all the farms, the British employed them as guards in the concentration camps. So for the first time in history, you have these white people with black people over them, reporting on them, intruding as they saw it. And they came out of that, and that was one of the things they said, never again. That's not going to happen again. And so the people who were among the last to surrender were among the first members of the party, the National Party, to create apartheid. And of course, that creates the conditions for the camp that Willem ends up in, because Willem's told this is a conservation place, it's a safari place. That's what these people tell their children now in real life, that they send their children there. And actually, these children are being trained as guards for white farms, because there is a belief that there's an epidemic of violence against white farmers in South Africa. Now, there is an epidemic of violence, full stop, in South Africa, as you know. And white farmers are affected by that, but not statistically more than any other group. The Southern Poverty Law Centre, which monitors hate crimes in the world, has identified the cause of the white South African farmer as being a contributing factor in hate crimes like Anders Breivik in Norway, the mosque attacks in New Zealand, a number of hate groups, including recently in the United States, who cite this, we've got to save the white farmers from this idea of a black tide rising. So that's what those children are being co-opted to do. And of course, that's directly related to the Boer War, because what they say is we can't have what happened then with them, oppressing us happen again.
And the camp that Willem ends up in, the New Dawn Safari Training Camp, I mean, you've been to places which are pretty much like that.
Yeah.
It's astonishing.
I mean, I don't know where to start with that, really, because I think the thing is first of all, we're talking about it like it's quite far away. The idea of camps to toughen children up, particularly boys. It's almost always boys. It's very rarely girls. Such places exist in many countries, and the idea of conversion therapy exists in this country. It's just been made illegal or being made illegal, but it exists. Boy Erased is a very good film, and also a book with Nicole Kidman by Garrard Conley about his experiences in one in America in the 90s. But this camp is about all kinds of boys who don't fit in, and they're sent there, and their parents pay to send them there. And there's a network of them, and they're run by former soldiers. And we think, you imagine that as being evil, like extraordinary somehow. It's actually very pedestrian. It's in a suburb an hour south of Johannesburg, and I very much wanted to go there because I wanted to see the place where Raymond had. There's a photograph, and you can see him outside the gates, and I wanted to stand where he stood and where his mum stood, and this is his last time in the world where he was free. And so I was there with a man called Z, who I mentioned in my book, who was my driver and producer, a brilliant man. And I asked him if we could find it. And we interviewed the police who were involved in tracking down the killers of Raymond Boys, and they gave us directions, and we tried to find it. And basically after a whole day of driving around, and people would stop, I'd ask for directions in English, they'd answer in Afrikaans to me, not him, because he was black and they wouldn't speak to him. I don't understand, he translates, and we just keep driving around. And eventually we got there, and I got out and I recognised the picture of the gates, and I pressed the buzzer, and there was silence, because I thought, who lives there? Because the man is in jail who owns this suburban bungalow with a camp behind it. I pressed it again and nothing, and I pressed it on the third time. A car arrived from way back in the compound, and saw that red dust, and the wheels were kicking up. It was a very small car, loads of dogs, and 2 young guys got out, and they kept their hands behind the car door. And I said, "Do you live here?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Do you know anything about, you know, the man who lived here before?" And they said, "No." And I said, "Do you know anything about the boys who were here before?" And they said, "We don't know anything about those boys." I'm like, okay. And so we kept talking. They kept trying to find out more about me. I kept telling them nothing about me. And then as we were talking, from the road either side of the gates came 2 trucks, 2 big identical white trucks, backies, open topped, you know, and out got guys from each of those in khaki with, and they were massive, with guns, just not bothering to hide the guns at all. Very relaxed guys, you know, I guess you would be if you had guns like that, very relaxed. And they were like, "Hey, who are you? What are you doing here?" And I said, "Oh, you know, I've come to find out about what happened here. Do you know about the boys who were here?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "And do you know about Alex DeCoker, the man who ran this place?" And they said, "Yes, he's in jail now. He's painting the inside of his cell to look like this view. We'll tell you all about it. We'll answer all your questions if you just get in the truck." And the whole time I was talking, they were trying to get in between me and Z. And he was sweating, he's black, he's just terrified. I realized what was starting to happen. I was trying to be very calm about it. Again, it was weird. It took me back to my childhood, to dealing with my mum's boyfriend, who was always so angry. And it was like, if I felt, if I could be calm, you know, I could stop it, you know, erupting. And I was very calm, and I said, "Look, I have to be back in Johannesburg at 6 o'clock. I'm expected for drinks. You know, I'm afraid I can't come with you. But if you could drive us back to the road, because we got lost on the way here, that would be really helpful." Knowing they were going to follow us anyway. And they did. And the headlights were sort of in the car, went mirror. And I got back to the hotel, and I'd taken my husband with me on that trip, which I don't normally do. And he saw me, and he was just like, "God," you know. And I told him about my day, and, you know, and he just like, "I'll get you a drink." And at that point, I realized I absolutely had to do this, because there were these places, these boys are still being sent to them. And I felt in the same way as when I saw those names on that grave, I felt like I have a moral obligation to tell the story, because people need to know this is happening in the world. And if one person reads it and decides not to send their child, then the whole thing will be worthwhile.
Politically, is it possible to say how connected that sort of typical group that you've just described in that horrific story, how connected they would be to an organization like the AWB, because you refer to them?
Oh my God, completely connected. Completely connected. Yeah. No, they're the same. I mean, the guy who was in real life, Alex DeCoker, the guy who ran the camp that Raymond the boys were sent to, he was Eugene Terre-Blanche's bodyguard. So these people are completely connected, and, as you know, terrifying and also ludicrous, all at the same time. And you know, they're wrapped up in the politics of the UK as well, because Aaron Banks and the Brexit Party and all these people all have these links to these groups in South Africa. So you know, it's yeah, they're very real people. You know, I mean, I wasn't thrilled about engaging with them or upsetting them, I have to say, but you know, it had to be done.
Because the Terre Blanche figure, I mean, when you and I were talking a few days ago, I said to you, I remember going to South Africa as a journalist in 1994, to cover the election of Nelson Mandela, and arriving at Johannesburg airport to coincide with a car bomb going off that was laid by his people. Fortunately, not so close, but close enough. It was the day after that I remember lots of his backers were arrested in a big police raid, and there was little or no violent incident thereafter during the election campaign. But
yeah, that was incredible. Because people thought there would be huge violence, didn't they? People were armed and prepared for it, and I'm sure you were when you went there as a journalist, thinking, you know, you're going into a war zone, actually.
Yeah. Oh, it was potentially very frightening, and I remember we all sat down and thought, if these arrests are as significant as the police say they are, this is a game changer, and it pretty much was. But I mean, Eugene Terreblanche was a hugely influential figure at that time, back in the 90s, wasn't he?
He was, and he was killed by two young boys who worked on his farm, who he terrorized and abused. And, again, that's part of the lore of, the lonely white victim out on their farm. But yeah, he was a very scary man. And interestingly, when I was writing the character in the book, the character of the general, he's one of the hardest characters to write, because obviously, I don't share his beliefs. It's very hard to empathize. How do you get into the head of somebody like that? And I was writing him, and he was very two-dimensional and not actually scary and quite ludicrous, and it wasn't working. And then I had to try and understand, what does he think he's doing? He doesn't think he's bad. He thinks he's good. He thinks he's helping these boys. He's toughening them up. He's getting them ready for this new South Africa that his stupid liberal parents don't understand. He's standing alone, and he feels like he's brave. And I think, what I could identify in him that I have experienced myself is fear. And so I was able to understand his fear, and that enabled me to write about him as a three-dimensional person. But the real life story of the man who ran the camp was so extraordinary that I could not have written it in the novel. I mean, he was unbelievable. And he got married in court, in the courtroom, to delay his court proceedings. He did every single thing that he could to delay the court proceedings. And in the end, he was sent to jail by his testimony of his own son. And so it was an extraordinary story. But again, truth is stranger than fiction so often.
I'm going to open up questions from those who've read it, who are watching us in a moment. I just wanted to ask you about the other characters that we've only really touched upon. You mentioned Raina, and you read that.
Yeah. Yes.
In the classroom, her daughter, her daughter's partner Jan. How they all came about in your head.
Well, because I think that I think to understand a person, you have to understand where they've come from. You have to understand, I think, if you get a new partner and you think, you understand them, and then you meet their parents, and then you really understand them. And I wanted the reader to have a full understanding of Willem before they met him. Because like history, big history with a capital H, family history is contested and argued about, and depending on who was in the room and what they heard. So over time, we see things happen to Raina, who is very independent, very strong, and we see things happen to her daughter, who is a bit more messed up and has come into the world at the end of apartheid, where she's kind of entitled and a bit useless. And then we see the son, the grandson, Willem, who's very close to his grandmother. And I wanted to explore that relationship in fiction, because I think often grandparents often find it easier to love their grandchildren than their own children, and I'm interested in that. So I wanted I wanted you to know Willem and to know his family, and I think that felt important to me.
Yeah. I'm going to throw it back to Peter, because I don't doubt there are plenty of questions coming in.
Peter looks like he's reading the newspaper.
I'm reading the questions, cheeky. I'm just choosing which one to ask first. This is one from Julia Eccles. She says that you mentioned that you wanted to leave loose ends, that you like loose ends in a novel. Does that mean it leaves you open to write a sequel? And if not, what is your next novel going to be?
A really good question. No, the spaces that there are in the book aren't spaces where you would write a sequel, because it would just be answering questions that I'm happy to leave unanswered, or for people to argue about themselves. So no, but I mean, do I still think about the characters? Would I go back and revisit them? I definitely am interested. I want to know what happens to, Sarah and Helen when they go back to the farm with Samuel, and how is it that, his family continues. What, you know, where does this other child come from? And so I'm really interested in what happens on the farm when they get back. And I also like to think that for Willem, you know, he survives, spoiler, this experience, but I like to think about what happens to him in his life. So, but I think I like to think about those. I'm not sure that I want to write a novel about it. We're working on the film adaptation just now, and that's interesting because that enables me to answer some of those questions. What I'm working on just now is the TV adaptation of Maggie and Me, and then there's 2 other books to come. One is a novel and one is a memoir, and I can't decide which one I want to write. I've been talking about it this morning. I might just toss a coin.
Actually, can I just pick you up on your spoiler? Because were you tempted? Because obviously you leave us guessing momentarily as to whether Willem did survive.
Yeah. Yes.
Was there a part of you that thought it was weighing that one up, or was that always going to be?
Oh no, it was really, that was one of the hardest things to do. You've touched on that was one of the very most difficult bits, because in real life, Raymond Boys dies, and that broke my heart. And I thought about Willem, and you know, I love him, and I feel protective towards him, and I had, so basically that saving Willem was a way for me of saving Raymond. You know, I couldn't do that in real life, but in fiction I could save a boy, and so I saved him.
Well, I'm glad you did. Sorry, Peter, I interrupted.
No, that's good. That's good. So here's one from, now this might be a spoiler as well, so you decide. The original Readers Book Group from Hayward Heath. During our group discussion, we all wondered if we had missed a clue about the Mrs. Creel who was in the camp with Sarah Vanderbilt, and the Mrs. Creel that cooks the escaping boys' eggs.
You haven't missed it. I mean,
without spoiling,
she's a descendant. She's a descendant of. So what I wanted to show, and of course, you know, she lives very near the camp, which was the farm. So I think Mrs. Creel was a good character to write because she's very, very selfish. She's one of those people who will, you know, who I think crop up in every war, in every street actually. Who, no matter what happens, they'll be all right, you know, and yet all she does is complain, you know, all she does is complain. And she's kind of pompous, and that's how she starts off. Sometimes she's well-meaning, but she's pompous, and that comes from her own insecurities. But what we see over time is that the character who was that in 1899 becomes the character who, when, you know, who does the thing that happens, we won't spoil it, but who does the thing that happens when she's cooking the eggs. So we see her character change over time, but it's that inherited thing, you know, how much are we bound by the families that we're born into, as opposed to the decisions that we make about who we are as people? How much control over our own morality do we have? So so that's Mrs. Creel. Not a fan.
And as a kind of ancillary question to that, the relationship, if there is one, between the general and Sarah.
Oh, that's a very good one. I'm not going to answer that question. Too spoilery. Can't reveal anything.
That's fair enough. Now there's questions from the best book club in the world.
Oh, good. Okay.
But you may feel you've already answered these, so I'm going to ask them, and then if you want to do some tangent. I think you kind of already have in a way. What are your connections with South Africa, and why did you choose to write about this subject? You've kind of touched on that.
I've kind of answered that, but what I will say is that I still, you know, I was hoping that writing about the story might cause, you know, my friend who I'd lost since school to reappear, and that hasn't happened yet, but I'm hopeful that it still might happen.
Right. And then the other one, which again you might feel you've answered. We understand you visited a camp recently. How did you find it? What was the atmosphere like? I think
I feel we've covered that.
I think you have. And then this is from Frank Bartram saying, given that you've met so many contemporary writers in your salon, did that mean that you had lots of literary influences when writing this?
That's a good question. I mean, I run my literary salon, which has been going for 10 years, and I host the Big Scottish Book Club. So I spend my time interviewing writers, and you know, as Julian will attest, you know, when you're interviewing people, you're asking questions, but you're also answering questions for yourself. And it's a kind of constant process of research. So I feel like these conversations that I have it's like a lifelong masterclass in fiction, because I'm learning the whole time. And I think, if you've read my memoir and then you read the novel, I think you'll see very clear connections between the two books, although they're very different worlds. It's very similar themes. It's mothers and sons, it's survival, it's resistance, it's friendship, it's hope. And those are the themes that I connect with most often in the stuff that I read or that I choose to read or talk about at my salons. But yeah, that's just like a kind of ongoing masterclass. And of course, you get sent stuff as well that you don't like, or that you don't want to be like, or you think, and then you get sent stuff that's so good you just think, why bother? Why bother even sitting down at the typewriter today? Because, Hilary Mantel's already said it, or Sarah Perry's already nailed it, or Kate Moss has already done it. And you just, it's so good, it makes you want to give up, but, can't ever.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question. Do you also find it inhibiting when you read or when you talk to these people and think, my God, how can I possibly?
Well, I think you do, but I also think that I choose to be encouraged by that rather than intimidated by that, because I know that you could never, and two people sit down to write a love story and one person comes out with, sweet sorrow, and another person comes out with Romeo and Juliet. They're both love stories. So I think there's room for everybody. I think what you need to do is find your own voice, and tell it from your own perspective, and realize that that's limited, and accept and celebrate the limitations of that place that you speak from, that only you can speak from.
Yeah. And may I ask, if you don't mind, Julian, can I ask my own question, which is, you talked about chopping back a lot of the book you couldn't use, which sounds fascinating, actually, the stuff you couldn't use. But how is that going to be for the filming and the TV adaptations? Are you going to be gutted when you find that they've had to maybe simplify it in some way? It's a common thing among writers that they've lost a lot of the book.
The director I'm working with is a guy called Brett Allers Innes, who's well known in South Africa, and I think it's important to work with a South African person on this next stage of it. His ideas are very good, and I like the structure that he has. When I was writing this book, I listened a lot to the soundtrack of the film The Hours, the Virginia Woolf story, and when Brett sent me the treatment for the film, he said, I want to focus on the three women in the same structure as The Hours. And I was like, oh my God, that is so spooky. Like, the soundtrack has seeped into the book and he's picked up on that somehow. And, and this is where he wants to take the film. So I'm sure the film will leave things out. And if he wants to, root around in my cuttings drawer, he's more than welcome to do that. There's plenty there. There's plenty there. That's what I would say.
The TV thing, the same thing. Maggie and Me, the TV adaptation.
Maggie and Me is different because it's my story. I mean, the novel has too, but Maggie and Me is me, and is my family. And so I'm working on that with a writer called Andrea Gibb, who wrote Elizabeth is Missing with Glenda Jackson, and who writes Call Midwife, and who's a brilliant writer. And the current thinking is that it's going to be a series. It's going to be 3 series, each of 8 episodes, and I'm going to write a couple of episodes of each series. So in actual fact, with that, we're not losing anything. We're adding in, we're going around and taking out all the stuff that I couldn't put in the first time around, because Maggie and Me it's a narrative. It's a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. That has to work on its own as a book, whereas the TV series, each episode is a narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and each series is a narrative at the beginning, a middle, and an end. And so there's more room for more stories, and there will be stuff that's made up in there as well, which is where it'll part. So it will start off with the real characters and the real world and real stuff, but it will bring in some stuff that was cut and some stuff that was made up in the spirit of. So it's a comedy drama, it's not memoir.
Yeah. Before I hand back to Julian, in case he's got another question to squeeze in and to say goodbyes from both of you, let me just say that we need to thank that on behalf of the festival. I want to thank the sponsors. I want to point out to the audience that Waterstones are doing a 10% discount on any of Damian's books, or indeed any of the books that are featured today in the festival. All you have to do is phone up and then it's click and collect, and it's Waterstones in Haywards Heath. I also need to point out that this is a non-profit festival, so if any of you have donated already, thank you so much. If you haven't but are willing to do so, then go to the festival website and you'll see how you can put a bit of money into the pot for next year's festival. But now, thank you all for coming, but let me pass back to Damian and Julian to say their goodbyes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. There was just one more that I was going to ask, because I was intrigued by the fact that you've obviously been on tour with this as much as you were able to.
Yeah.
Prior to not being able to do such things. In South Africa itself, how was it?
Yes.
How was it received?
I went to an Afrikaans festival called Woordfeest. I was really nervous about going, and I was welcomed with open arms, and people were incredibly grateful that the stories of their parents and grandparents were being told, or great grandparents, depending on how old or young they were. I mean, when I was signing books, sometimes people would stand and talk to me for sort of 10 minutes at a time and cry, telling me what had happened to, a relative that they'd lost in the camps, or that, they were the descendant of an English soldier who'd stayed on and married, and how difficult that had made their family lives. And, people brought pictures and artifacts. And so, I'm very glad to be able to say that people were, I think, a bit puzzled as to why this Scotsman was telling this story, but they were very welcoming of it. And to be honest, I wish I'd met some of them when I was doing the research for the book, because the stories they told me were great, and it would have been great to be able to put them in. But you live and learn.
Well, listen, good luck when it's in film and when it's on television, and with whatever comes next, whatever you write next. And congratulations.
Thank you.
It was a terrific read. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you for your questions. They were very, very good. And thank you for shepherding me through all that. And thank you to Peter and to everybody who asked questions, and to everybody who's come today, and to Sheila and all the organisers, and to the sponsors, because I know how important it is to have that support. So I'm going to leave and then pop back into the chat room, and I'll be with you in a few minutes. So thank you, Julian.
Thank you both very much, and goodbye.